Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Douglas, the teaching pastor here at the 456. Thanks for joining us this week for our community gathering video. We've just finished week 2 of 4 weeks of Bible stories. We're going through some of these very familiar or very commonly used Bible stories and kind of reapproaching them or coming at them from hopefully what is not a new angle, but we're trying to handle them maybe with a little bit more care. And so this past week we talked about Jonah and the fish. And man, I loved this story as a kid. Grew up talking about Jonah in the well, and I don't know, I just loved it. I remember a few years back, I was preaching a lot, doing a lot of youth camps, and a friend of mine, I can't remember who it was, but somebody had made some shirts that had like a whale on it, and it said, "Obey or get swallowed." Which is not really the point of Jonah and the fish, but it was a funny shirt because God had told Jonah to go to Nineveh and preach, and Jonah's like, no, and then God sends a big fish to swallow him up. But there's a lot going on in this story, and we got into quite a bit of it. Sunday, but we can go into more detail at some point. If you want to come and visit me here at the studio, or if you want to come by on Wednesday night sometime for Bible study, we can go into a little bit more detail. But let's recap really quickly what we had on tap this past week. Our theology was God wants people to know Him. That is a really beautiful truth about who God is. He wants people to know Him. And I, for one, am very grateful for that. And you, if you've put your faith in Jesus, you should be really grateful for that, because you and I have come to know Jesus. We've come to know God because God desires to be known. He desires for us to come into a relationship with Him. Our application this past week is one that's similar to things we've heard before, but it says, our personal feelings should not impact our evangelical response. Our personal feelings should not impact our evangelical response. And we talked a lot about how Jonah, I explained a little bit this past Sunday who the Ninevites were in relationship to the Jews and why Jonah didn't really want to go and minister to the Ninevites. Jonah knew, we saw from the text, that God was going to rescue him, that God was going to redeem them. And the Ninevites were hated enemies and hated oppressors of the Israelites. And so Jonah's response to that, his emotional response, his personal response to that was completely based off of the reason he fled from God and didn't want to go share the gospel wasn't, it was because he didn't like the Ninevites. He didn't feel like they deserved to be saved, and he knew that God was merciful and that God would save them. And so his evangelical response, his desire to see someone saved, was trumped by the fact that his personal feelings got in the way. And so the application was that our personal feelings cannot shape our evangelical response. And then our prayer this past week was, God, help us to have the same heart for the lost that you have. And this is a really, really easy thing to say and an incredibly difficult thing to do. Because normally when we talk about this, when we say, man, I don't know, I can just kind of imagine it, right, in a group setting or whatever. We kind of put on this voice, we kind of put on these airs, and we say something along the lines of, I just really want this person to come to know Jesus. I just desire for them to be saved. And normally, not across the board, and hopefully this isn't the case for us, but normally when we're saying those kinds of things, man, I really long for this person to be saved. It's somebody we care about. It's somebody we love. It's somebody that we have a high opinion of. It's somebody that we have an emotional, a good, healthy emotional connection to. It's our kids. It's a loved one that we have, an acquaintance, a good friend, and a fellow employee. And we're like, man, they're such a good guy. They're such a great person. They're such a wonderful woman. If only she knew Jesus, man, I just want her to know Jesus. And it's really easy for us to have that kind of feeling for the lost in our life who we love. But I wonder how often we really ask that God would give us a heart for the lost, like across the board, the lost, in the same way that He does. It's interesting that I have heard in Christian circles, let's not even talk about secular circles, I've heard in Christian circles people talk poorly about Islam as a faith or Islam as a religion, or poorly about people who are Muslim in their practice, and they say, man, all of those people, like, it's racism is what it boils down to. It's racism. What would it be like for us to say, man, my heart for these people is that they would know Jesus? What would it be like for us to think back on our childhood, to think back on our tormentors, to think back on people who wounded us or persecuted us or treated us wickedly? What would it be like for us to say, man, my deepest desire for them is that they would know God? Because I promise you that God's desire for people is that they would know him, that they would come into a saving relationship with him. And so when we look at this text in Jonah, what it does is, in fact, in a few years after all of this and after the redemption of the people in Nineveh, the Assyrians are going to be wicked again. And the Assyrians as a whole are going to turn away from God, and they're going to be wicked, and they're going to persecute the people of God again. That's going to happen. So what happens in Nineveh here, where 120,000 people get saved, it doesn't change the climate forever, but it changed everything for those 120,000 people. Those 120,000 people one day will, with you and I, be shoulder to shoulder before the Lord worshiping God, because they came to a place where they heard the message of God and they repented, provided that their faith was real, right? Like, it's hard for us to have that discussion, but what would it be like for us to care for the lost? It doesn't mean we're going to be best friends with every person we come in contact with, or that we're going to have them over for Thanksgiving dinner, but what would it be like to have a heart for the lost that God does? And that is, I have one aim for those who don't know Jesus, that's that they would know Jesus. Now, I have 3 questions that I want you to consider today as you're going about your life, or as you're sitting there with some friends or family, or if you're in one of our community gathering groups. Question number 1, how did you come to know your best friend? How was it that you came to know your best friend? What was it? Tell us, give us a brief history of how you two became friends. Second question is, have you ever had a chance encounter with someone who was famous? I have only had one that I can remember, maybe 2, but the one that I always remember is meeting Scott Baio in a subway in an airport in New Mexico. And I first saw him in the bathroom. We were peeing next to each other. And I thought that probably wasn't the best time to introduce myself. So I waited until he went out and then followed him into the subway line and introduced myself there. He doesn't care who I am, but anyway, I grew up watching Charles in Charge, so I met him. But have you ever had an encounter with somebody who was famous, or moderately famous, right? And then the third question that I want you to answer is this: how might you, don't answer this for the general population, how might you, as an individual, as a person, how might you grow to have an eternal gospel view of the lost? How might you personally grow to a place? What needs to shift in your life? What needs to be added to your life so that you can have a better gospel view of the lost? What needs to be removed from your life so that you can see people the way that God sees them? And so when we think about this and you're going, what do these 3 questions have to do with each other? It is easy for us to look on affection with our best friends. It is easy for us to look on affection like movie stars or people in the sports world that we venerate, that we idealize or whatever, because we follow them on social media or whatnot. But what would it look like for us to have a gospel response? What needs to shift in you and me? What needs to shift for us to have a gospel response to all the lost? And so think about that for a little bit and talk about it with the people that you happen to be hanging out with right now. Even if it's just your family, that would be great. Discuss it. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Hope you're having a great week, and I'll talk to you later.